all smiles in Cairo a while ago when the Nile Basin Initiative countries met and commemorated the Nile Day. But there are many issues behind these smiles, especially over the sharing of the Nile water resources. We'll be delving into those issues and a lot more right here in this edition of Global Business Tonight. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for joining us. Here's what's in the pipeline. We'll be looking at the plight of South Africans who live around coal stations. And small businesses in Nigeria cashing in on the postponement of elections as demand for campaign materials is still strong. Right then, let's start tonight with a very touchy politics of water, specifically if that H2O happens to come from the Nile. Nile Basin countries, as I mentioned earlier, just commemorated the Nile Day. It's an annual smorgasbord, if you will, that seeks to promote cooperation in the use of the river's resources. This, however, was the very first time that all countries involved in the Nile Basin Initiative, including Egypt, took part. But don't let that fool you. There still are bitter divisions over the best way to use the Nile's water. When the Entebbe Agreement was signed in 2010, it called for a redistribution of water use quotas. Now, Egypt essentially rejected that agreement and boycotted the initiative, arguing that it undermines its share of water from the Nile. It also objected to Ethiopia's construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam, saying it violates a colonial-era agreement between Egypt and the UK that gave the North African country nearly 70% share of the Nile. Ethiopia maintains, however, the dam will not affect Egypt in any way. Like other upstream countries, it also argues that the 1959 treaty between Egypt and the UK ignores the needs of the 5 upstream countries.
We can say and express that we will eternally protect every drop of water from this river to ensure that it continues and flows, because Egypt, of course, is the downstream state, meaning it is the final country that the Nile reaches. It's possible to say that our participation confirms our reciprocity and our interest in this river, the entire thing, and its continuity and its flow in light of the climate change that threatens the Nile Basin countries.
We are one family. We have one Nile. We have to cooperate to develop this resource in the way win-win and equitable utilization.
We put a lot of effort both locally and internationally so that we can obtain grants for working on these waters and protecting the Nile water from pollution until the water is safe to drink and the people that live on the banks of the Nile are healthy and have work and bounty and also production.
We'll be live in Cairo a little later on looking at Egypt's engagement with the upstream states. For now, though, let's go to South Africa. Its GDP growth slowed down in 2014 to the lowest rate seen since 2009. Data from Statistics South Africa out today indicates that even though the economy grew by 1.5% in 2014, strikes in mining and manufacturing crippled production, and a late fourth quarter surge was simply not enough to lift overall growth for the year. The economy expanded by seasonally adjusted and annualized 4.1% in the fourth quarter of last year compared to a revised 2.1% in the third. The marginally better than expected performance was partially attributed to strong spending by consumers and the government. We're still in South Africa. Its tax system is currently under review. Changes might be announced when the country's finance minister delves into his budget in the next round at 24 hours. Now, tax revenue, of course, has steadily risen in nominal terms over the years, but it's still not quite enough to cover South Africa's total needs. As Sumitra Naidu reports, a fairly toxic combination of slow growth and high unemployment only makes fiscal policy that much harder.
Tax revenues came in at almost $80 billion in 2014. Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene needs to lift tax revenues by a further $2.3 billion over the next 3 years.
One way would be to increase the VAT rate by 0.5%, which would then provide you with that extra 9 billion. But I mean, that's very controversial because it's such a regressive tax. It has a disproportionate impact on the poor. So I think that's an unlikely scenario at the moment.
Personal income taxes, which make up for 60% of tax collection, might be a way for the minister to achieve his target. But this might mean more pain for South Africa's highly indebted middle class, which accounts for the bulk of individual tax revenues.
There's a lot of South Africans in that category that is, really in a position where they're not necessarily financially stable, and a further increase in taxes or something like that might just push them over the edge.
So the question is, where does the money come from? South Africa's only hope may be it's wealthy.
Taxes that could potentially be considered is capital gains tax. That's being seen as a tax on the wealthy, people with a lot of assets. If the top marginal rate is increased, it would probably go to, let's say, from 40 to 41%. But then you're looking at people earning above 500,000.
There's no doubt many will have to rethink their strategies going forward. For many businesses, the ongoing power crisis has already cut profit margins. The weak economic environment has also made it difficult to lift employment.
The companies, that's where you need the growth to come from. So the minute that you levy extra taxes on them, it's going to exacerbate the already difficult situation that we've got at the moment.
It's widely expected that road levies and the fuel levy will be increased this year. There's no doubt sin taxes on cigarettes and alcohol will go up again. Sumitra Naidu, CCTV, Cape Town.
Let's delve into those matters a little deeper. Angelo Coppola is live in Johannesburg right now with more data. Angelo, let's parse these numbers a bit. Fourth quarter growth, about double that seen in the third quarter. What sectors of the economy provided that late surge?
Well, the main contributors to that 4.2% growth were manufacturing, which came in at around 1.2%. Mining and quarrying added around the 1.1%, and finance, real estate and business services added 0.7 of a percentage point to give you that figure. Year on year, though, agriculture and construction were the big contributors to the overall GDP growth. But before we get too excited, Raman, let's bear in mind that annual GDP growth for the year was just 1.5%. That's down from 2.2% in 2013. Raman?
Indeed, and nowhere near enough to what South Africa needs to cut its unemployment levels decisively. Manufacturing and mining, the two sectors that you mentioned there. Given Eskom's consistent power problems, what's the outlook for companies in that sector?
Well, generally, Raman, most businesses are holding on to capital. Those that haven't invested in finding energy sources that they can use outside of the Eskom networks probably still have to do so, which means that they probably provision for it. And I suspect there are some businesses, maybe not in the mining and manufacturing sectors, that were hoping that Eskom would pull a rabbit out of the hat, which clearly they haven't. But looking at the mining sector, this sector is largely held captive by global cycles and super cycles for its margins and its profits. On the other hand, the manufacturing sector has a little more relative control over its own destiny, provided, of course, that customers need the products that they're making and that they're produced at the right price. Raman?
Indeed. Let's look at the collision of two trends here. You've got low commodity prices on one hand and power disruptions, which will essentially run into the long term, on the other. And of course, that meshes with the third trend, which you focused on here, the percentage of profitable mining companies in South Africa. Given these two problems, what's going to happen? How many of these mining firms will remain profitable this year?
Well, we've heard time and time again from economists and strategists that many businesses, including the mining sector and the manufacturing sector, are operating in survival mode. They're not wanting to invest in any significant amount until they see policy certainty and clarity from the government on a range of issues. In resources and commodities, read the mining sector, they're waiting to see what changes are going to be taking place in the legislation that affects that sector, because the legislation has gone back to the House because they need to separate the oil and gas sector from the mining sector. So that'll probably take another year or so before we see the light of day on that one. On the land reform bill, this has now become another warning light for potential investors who are already nervous about the state of play in this country. Raman?
Indeed. Angelo Coppola there live in Johannesburg. We're still in South Africa though. The country, as you might know, depends fairly heavily on coal to generate 85% of all the power that's consumed in the country. Now the flip side of that is that being dependent on coal is taking quite the toll on people's health. A report prepared by Greenpeace estimates that up to 2,700 premature deaths are caused every year by emissions from the country's 16 coal-fired power plants. As you're about to see, proximity to a coal power plant can be lethal.
In the shadow of one of South Africa's power stations, residents of Masekane collect their weekly coal rations. Eskom, the country's power utility, orders nearby mines to provide this community with coal free of charge. But it's unable to provide this township with electricity, even though Masekane is just a few hundred meters from the Duva power station.
I don't understand why we don't have electricity when we live where the electricity is produced.
We really want electricity. We need it a lot. We have children who go to school. They have to study. But it is really difficult to study by candlelight.
The first lights in South Africa were switched on in 1881, and since the end of apartheid in 1994, around 6 million homes have been electrified. But with an aging network, poorly maintained and permanently overloaded, 15% of homes are still without electricity. In Masekane, only the wealthiest residents can afford to get connected to the grid, but all of them suffer from their proximity to burning coal.
When I cough, it's black, so I know it's a cold. I'm going to hospital because I've been coughing a lot more. My chest really hurts.
90% of South Africa's electricity is generated by coal-fired power stations. In Masekane's dry, high-felt winter, coal dust coats everything in the township. Strict new air quality standards would have forced national power provider Eskom to reduce its harmful emissions. But it doesn't have the money to upgrade its stations and has asked for a delay in meeting the requirements.
This project will cost 72 billion rand. They have given us some permission to delay some of the new technologies that we want to implement on some of the power stations. They agree with us that it is part of a good plan, but currently we do not have enough money to implement those things.
Some of Masekane's residents work at a nearby coal mine, where they are required to wear gas masks. Back home, they have no such protection and no electricity either. Valdi Karolse, CCTV.
Let's revisit our lead story earlier on in the bulletin. Of course, this was the first time earlier this year, of course, when all the signatory parties to the Nile Basin Agreement sat down and commemorated the Nile Day as one party, including Egypt. But behind the smiles, there's plenty of disputes still to be resolved. Let's get the latest now from Yasser Kim, joins us from the Egyptian capital of Cairo. Yasser, construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, that hasn't stopped despite Egypt's objections to it. What is President Sisi doing to ensure that the country's water access is not compromised?
Well, at the moment, he's taking what you can call the soft power kind of diplomacy, where he's been doing a rapprochement with the Ethiopians. He has met the Ethiopian Prime Minister, and also there were several delegations that have visited Ethiopia, and also Ethiopian high-level delegations that came to Egypt, including the Coptic Church of both countries. Historical relationship there being retained again. So more of diplomacy, closeness, more trade and investment between both countries to try to make the trust or build the trust between both countries, because it has lost a lot in the last 3 years since the beginning of the construction of the dam. There's still fear until now, but Egypt has decided to take the diplomatic way rather than other means at this point.
Indeed, and that did result in a series of bilateral trade deals signed between these two parties in November. To what extent, however, has that eased tensions between these two states?
All the statements between officials on both sides are trying to reassure the public that relations now are good and that neither side wants to harm the other. The Ethiopians are saying they are only doing it for hydroelectricity and will not affect the water share to Egypt, while in Egypt says it's ready to listen to the Ethiopian side and see what's there. At this point, trade can play a big role. Investment can play a big role. There's the African Bank for Exim Bank for export and import is working on that. Even Egypt has produced or has established a holding company just to trade in the Nile Basin countries. So there are movements there. Maybe the signs are not yet there of big results, but you can see closeness. Maybe this can help in the negotiation table.
Indeed. Let's get down to the details of it, however. Both countries, Egypt and Ethiopia, they were supposed to get studies done on the potential effect that the Grand Renaissance Dam will have on water flows downstream. That was supposed to be done by December, but it's been delayed several times since then. What's the latest update on getting these studies done?
What they're agreed on is that there's supposed to be a financial institution and a research firm that will do all the research to decide what is the construction all about and what is needed to change so that it does not affect the Egyptian side or any amendments in the construction. For Egypt, it's highly important and urgent because 95% of Egypt's water depends on the Nile. Water in all life, it's not just for agriculture, for drinking water as well. So 95% of Egypt's source of water comes from the Nile. For Ethiopia, there are other sources. So Ethiopia is taking a bit slow. There were several meetings to decide on this firm, and those meetings were adjourned without deciding on it. Now it's been decided from London, a firm from London, and it should take 6 months, at least 6 months, to put its study on the table so that both sides would decide what is needed to happen. Now, Egypt wanted the construction to stop until the firm approves the research or ends its research, while Ethiopia says no, it will continue construction until the research is done, and then they would sit down and see what needs to be changed. This is a talking point. Another point is that Egypt has called on any agreement to be signed that guarantees no harm to Egypt's water share from the Ethiopian side, and this agreement has not yet been signed. Egypt needs guarantees, written guarantees, that nothing will affect Egypt's share of water.
Indeed, and of course the dispute over the use of the waters of the Nile continues. Asiase Kim live in Cairo. Let's make a quick run through the markets here for you. Fairly positive day right across the board, except however for Nairobi. We're still seeing a mild correction coming through the markets. 55.23 being the relevant number for the day. However, keep in mind, Safaricom hit an all-time high earlier today in trading, something over 15 shillings per share. We'll keep tabs on the stories and of course relay the latest to you right here. Now, speaking of Ethiopia, it's finding the shine in adding value to its raw leather exports. And does it really matter if it's black or white? We're not quoting Michael Jackson here. We'll be talking about Egyptian taxis shortly. Africa is on the move. It's home to 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies. We help you make sense of the fast-changing African business landscape. We take you where the business is happening. Global Business, weekdays at this time on CCTV Africa. Welcome back to the program. Last week we focused on Kenya's leather industry. Tonight our focus is on Ethiopia. An export report from the country shows that the country's leather products ended up in a variety of places, Italy, Germany and England last year. However, even as exports volumes do grow, at their current levels is still well below where the government wants them to be. Here's the good news, however. There's been an exponential growth in the number of entrepreneurs who are venturing into the leather business in Ethiopia.
Ethiopia's leather industry is booming, and the government plans to grow it to $500 million by the end of this year. Leather exports stood at $123 million in 2014. With the largest livestock population in Africa, Ethiopia has an oversupply of high-quality leather.
All Africa Leather Fair is an exhibition that brings all Africans together. We also have an easy, less expensive way of meeting different suppliers of different materials. It's a very good ground to network. It's a very good ground to innovate. It's a very good ground to improve, to get methods of low-cost production methods.
There's a huge demand for leather products locally and globally. Ethiopia's economy is among the fastest growing in Africa, attracting investors from all over the world. Although most of Africa's exports frequently suffer from no added value, with nations exporting raw materials and importing finished products, Ethiopia is starting to buck the trend.
Most of our customers are foreigners. Our leather products are better than those of previous years in terms of quality, but still we have a big challenge, that is in the inadequacy of trained and knowledgeable workers. This has of late compromised the quality of our products.
While the country's bovine leather industry has taken off, it still has plenty of potential to develop another source of leather. It's sheep. Ethiopia is home to more than 26 million of them. Clementine Logan, CCTV.
So then, does it matter if it happens to be black or white? Now, if you're talking about taxis in Egypt, then yes, it does really matter. Once upon a time, these were fairly popular icons all around Cairo, but now black taxis are disappearing for the capital streets. They're being outnumbered by their white counterparts, which are fitted with meters. Passengers apparently prefer the flat rates charged in the white taxis.
Spotting a black taxi in Cairo is no longer as easy as it used to be. Once a regular sight, they appear to be gradually disappearing from the city's clogged roads. Sabir Kheder drives one of the remaining black cabs.
The black taxis are declining. I've been roaming the streets for 1 complete hour and no one has stopped me to get a lift. Instead, the passengers take other white taxis.
Hazem Hussein is a passenger who would rather go with a white taxi because of the use of meters. The opening tariff in white taxis starts at 3 Egyptian pounds and then adds 1.25 Egyptian pounds or 16 US cents for every kilometer.
I prefer the white taxis rather than the black ones because the white taxis tell you the exact amount of money for your trip. 20, 30, 40 Egyptian pounds you will pay according to the meter. But the black taxis lack meters. If the trip costs 25 pounds, he would ask you for 30 or 40 pounds instead. This could cause problems between the passengers and the drivers.
Hassan Mahmoud used to drive a black taxi, but now he has a white one and he's happy to have changed over.
The tariff counter gives the exact reading on the ride. There are no more problems or obstacles since then. The passenger knows where he is going and what he will pay, and the counter gives both of us our rights.
Most of the white taxi owners purchased their vehicles through a bank payment plan. But economic turbulence in Egypt is making it hard for some drivers to meet the requirements.
When we went back afterwards to pay our installments, the banks added a higher interest rate for those 6 months. So how can I pay all this? Since the country is still moving slowly and there are no high profits from our rides.
Despite their differences, both black and white taxi owners share the same hope, that the country's economic recovery will lead to higher tourist and passenger numbers. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Quick run through commodity prices here for you. A barrel of crude oil, at least on Brent future contracts, up to about $59 a barrel so far at the moment. But interestingly, Angola will want to borrow about $10 billion in new external debt. We'll keep tabs on that story right here on Global Business. We'll be in another oil producer next. Small businesses are cashing in on the postponement of Nigeria's elections. We'll tell you why shortly. 18:25. Thank you for watching Global Business. Now, the business boom for printers, at least in Nigeria, does continue. And it all has to do with the postponement of the country's elections all the way to the 28th of March. Demand for posters, banners, T-shirts, you name it, for politicians so far is still quite strong. In Grassroots tonight, we'll take you to the south of the country, where the printing industry is very, very busy.
The search for votes in Nigeria has seen politicians giving out bags of rice, cartons of noodles, tubes of yam and even money. Here in Bayelsa, in the south of the country, a campaign team for the ruling PDP party hands out caps, wraps and T-shirts to residents. The uncertainty caused by the postponement of the polls has tipped the country's financial markets into turmoil, with the naira sliding to a record low. But for small businesses, it's been a chance to cash in on the millions of dollars spent by political party campaigns. Printing machines are constantly rolling out posters and flyers to meet the demand.
It's a period that those in the printing business always look forward to, because during that time for politicians' campaigns, they do posters, they do banners, and so on. So definitely printers always look forward to the electionary period.
Ogunake David prints T-shirts by hand. Using a stencil and paint, he is busy filling out an order of 5,000 pieces.
We're always busy. We're always busy. You can see now, because we don't have much time. We're always busy. You can see all this side and this kind. We are doing the T-shirts till they finish the election. So we have to be doing the job. We have so many jobs of campaign we are doing now. Like the PDP, we're doing it, AC, we're doing it.
While issues of insecurity, corruption and economy feature heavily on the campaign trail, gifts like these are unlikely to swing votes in Africa's most populous nation. The electorate is divided along lines that for the most part have little to do with policy. Many Nigerians vote for candidates from their own area or allied ethnic group. Noel Makugu, CCTV.
Right, let's sprint through currencies here for you. Keep a very close eye on the South African rand. 11.58, the relevant number for today. That might change, however, depending on what Mr. Nene presents in his budget later on tomorrow. We will have the details on that right here on the program. Here's what we're working on for tomorrow's program. Of course, South Africa's budget is right at the top of our agenda. What's his fiscal policy? Will he raise taxes? What's he going to cut in terms of spending? We'll get the answers to that later on tomorrow. And of course, on top of that, we'll be starting a new series of stories looking at the progress African countries are making towards digital migration. It's a highly contentious issue across East Africa. Kenya has problems, Uganda has some, Tanzania has had issues to deal with. All that and more will be coming your way in the next 24 hours. For now, though, thank you so much for watching this edition of Global Business. We'd like to hear what you think about the program. globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com is the email address to use. Facebook and Twitter, of course, are your port of call when we are not on air. See you tomorrow. I'm Raman Yang.